Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the case, Saul turned down. Right now, over 85% of the people watching aren't subscribed. If you've been enjoying these Nero Wolfe stories, hitting that subscribe button is the best way to be sure you never miss the next mystery. Your support helps keep these stories alive and lets us keep bringing them to you. The rain had been steady since dawn, thin and cold, tapping the brownstone's front windows with the insistence of a salesman who wouldn't take no. I was in the office going through the mail when the bell rang. Fritz never goes to the door, so it was my job. Saul Pantzer stood there, rain on his hat brim and collar. His overcoat was buttoned to the neck, and his expression was one I'd seen only a handful of times, somewhere between reluctant and resigned. I stepped back to let him in. "Morning," he said, voice low. "Wolfe in?" "In the chair, same as always," I told him. "You're early for someone without an appointment." He followed me into the office. Wolfe sat in his yellow chair, the Morning Gazette open across his lap, a glass of beer within reach. His eyes rose briefly to Saul's face before dropping back to the page. "Mr. Pantzer," he said, "this is unusual. I haven't summoned you." Saul set his hat on the edge of my desk, placed his gloves beside it, and kept standing. "I need to tell you about something I didn't do," he said. Wolfe made a sound deep in his throat that might have been curiosity. I stayed by my desk, waiting. Saul wasn't one to waste words, and when he hesitated, it meant the next ones mattered. "Yesterday afternoon," Saul said, "I was approached by a young woman outside the Belasco Theatre. She asked if I was Saul Pantzer. I said yes. She told me she had a message for you, private, and handed me a sealed envelope. Said I was to deliver it this morning, unless she telephoned before 8 to cancel. If she called, I was to return her money and destroy the envelope. She called at 7:45. Wolfe turned a page of the Gazette with careful fingers. "You complied?" "Yes," Saul said. "I gave back the fee. She thanked me. That's it." Wolfe glanced at the clock on his desk. "And now?" Saul's eyes fixed on Wolfe's. "She's dead. Found in her apartment early this morning. Gas oven on, window closed. Police are calling it suicide." I felt the air change in the room, not with any sudden move from Wolfe, but with the way his head lifted a fraction, his gaze sharpening under the lids. "You are certain?" Wolfe asked. "I heard it from a friend in the 17th Precinct," Saul said. "Name's Margaret Layton, age 27, lived alone, no family in the city." "Bah," Wolfe muttered. "A corpse and an envelope you did not deliver. That's not a case. It's an anecdote." Saul shifted his weight. "Maybe, but the envelope's still here. I didn't burn it. I thought—" "You thought I might wish to see it," Wolfe finished. "Something like that." I looked at him. "Where is it now?" "In my coat pocket," Saul said. He took it out, a plain manila envelope, no markings, sealed with a thin strip of glue. He set it on my desk. I resisted the urge to reach for it. Wolfe's eyes were on it, then on Saul. "You disobeyed her instructions," Wolfe said. "I bent them," Saul replied. "She told me to destroy it if she called to cancel. She didn't tell me to destroy it if she was found dead the next morning." The rain deepened its drumming on the windows. Wolfe set aside the Gazette. "You have told the police of this?" "No." "Why not?" Wolfe asked. Saul's face didn't change. "Because they'd ask why I held it back, and I'd have to tell them I thought it might be useful to you first." That got Wolfe's full attention. He leaned back, folding his hands across his middle. "You present me with a puzzle I am not engaged to solve, Mr. Pantzer. An envelope from a dead woman who cancelled her own errand. And you expect me to what? To act from curiosity?" Saul met his eyes. "I expect you to act because she didn't strike me as the type to end her own life. She was jumpy, looking over her shoulder. When she handed me that envelope, she checked the street twice. If it's nothing, you can throw it in the fire." Wolfe's gaze moved to me. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Bring it here." I did. The weight in my hand was negligible, but it had the kind of importance you could feel in your palm. Wolfe turned it over once, studying the flap. He didn't open it. "Was she followed when she met you?" he asked Saul. "Not that I saw, but she was careful." "Careful people sometimes have enemies," Wolfe said. I said, "So do careless people." Neither of them smiled. Wolfe set the envelope on the corner of his desk, far from his beer. "I have no standing in this matter," he said. "Mr. Panzer, unless you engage me formally, I will not meddle. I dislike being a spectator to death." Saul's jaw tightened. "Then consider this formal. I'll pay your fee." Wolfe shook his head. "No, this is not mercenary. If I choose to look into it, I will do so for my own reasons. You will leave the envelope here. I will decide whether to open it." Saul glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. "She's in the morgue now. If you wait too long—" "I never hurry," Wolfe said. Saul picked up his hat and gloves. "Then I've done what I can. I'll be at home if you need me." I showed him out. The rain had eased, but the street was slick, catching the dull gleam of passing headlights. When I came back, Wolfe was still in his chair, staring at the envelope as if it might open itself. "You're going to read it," I said. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but not yet. It will keep." The office was quiet, except for the rain and the soft tick of the wall clock. I sat at my desk, wondering what kind of message a dead woman had thought too dangerous to deliver, and why Saul Panzer had broken his own rules to bring it here. Wolfe reached for his beer, took a measured sip, and let the envelope lie between us, sealed and waiting. The knock was firm and unhurried, the kind that belongs to a man who knows the door will open. I had barely crossed the office when I caught a trace of damp tobacco in the air. Inspector Kramer stepped inside as I swung the door open, water beading on the shoulders of his brown overcoat. His cigar was clamped in the side of his mouth, unlit for the moment, which was rare enough to notice. "Morning, Goodwin," he said, brushing past me. "Wolfe in?" "In the chair," I said. "But I'll warn you, he's in one of those moods." "When isn't he?" Kramer muttered, striding into the office. Wolfe was exactly where Kramer expected him. Yellow chair turned at the right angle for reading, the Gazette folded neatly on the side table. His half-finished beer sat within reach, condensation catching the lamplight. Wolfe looked up only far enough to register Kramer's face. "Inspector," Wolfe said, "you're wet." Kramer pulled the cigar from his mouth, turned it between thick fingers, and gave Wolfe a steady look. "Margaret Leighton, mean anything to you?" Wolfe's eyes flickered toward the desk, toward the manila envelope Saul Panzer had left not an hour before. "Not personally," Kramer grunted. 27 years old, lived alone on East 53rd, found in her kitchen this morning, gas oven open, pilot out, window shut. We're calling it suicide for the paperwork, but I'm not buying it. I stayed near my desk, leaning against it with my hands in my pockets. "And what makes you doubt it?" Kramer shifted his weight. "No note, for one thing. For another, her landlord says she was paid up for the month, had an appointment with a dressmaker this afternoon. People set to kill themselves don't usually worry about new clothes." "That is a generality, not a law," Wolfe said. Kramer ignored that. "She had a visitor yesterday afternoon, a man matching Saul Panzer's description." I let my eyebrows go up. "You've been busy." "It's my job," Kramer said shortly, "and now I'd like to know what Panzer was doing there." "That," Wolfe said, "is a matter you should put to Mr. Panzer." "I did," Kramer said. "He gave me nothing, just said it was private business and walked away. I thought maybe you could loosen him up." Wolfe's mouth flattened. "Mr. Panzer is not my subordinate. If he chooses to maintain confidence, I will not violate it." Kramer turned toward me. "What about you, Archie?" "I'm in the same boat," I said. "I don't talk for Saul any more than he talks for me." Kramer took the unlit cigar between his teeth and chewed it once, hard. His gaze followed mine to the desk, to the envelope Wolfe hadn't moved since Saul left. "What's in that?" he asked. "A piece of my property," Wolfe said evenly. "And since you ask without warrant or cause, I decline to show you." "Property from a dead woman's apartment?" "From a messenger," Wolfe corrected. Kramer's nostrils flared. "You're not involved in this case?" "I'm not engaged," Wolfe said. "Nor do I intend to be." That last part didn't ring true to me. Wolfe's eyes had gone back to the envelope twice in the last 2 minutes, the way a man glances at a chessboard when he's already seen the winning move. Kramer planted his feet. "You might not have taken the case, but you're knee-deep in it already. If this turns out to be murder and you're sitting on something—" "Inspector," Wolfe interrupted, "if it turns out to be murder and you prove it, you will have my admiration, but you will not have my assistance unless I choose to offer it." There was a pause, heavy enough that I could hear the rain on the windows again. Kramer pulled the cigar out of his mouth, jabbed it toward Wolfe. "One day that high seat of yours is going to splinter under you." I will have it repaired, Wolfe said. Kramer shot me a look that mixed frustration with something that might have been resignation. Tell Panzer I'm not through with him. I'll pass it along, I said. He turned toward the door, then stopped. She was wearing gloves when they found her, he said. In her own kitchen, in November. Think about that. He left without another word. I shut the door behind him, heard his heavy steps descend, and the front latch click as he went out into the rain. When I came back into the office, Wolfe was staring at the envelope again, the tips of his fingers pressed together under his chin. You're not taking the case? I asked. No, he said. I waited. Nothing more came. Then why, I said, do I get the feeling you're going to open that envelope before lunch? His eyes narrowed a fraction. Archie, there is a distinction between resisting engagement and ignoring curiosity. One is principle, the other is folly. I went to my desk, sat down, and watched him for a while. The envelope stayed where it was, untouched, but Wolfe's gaze kept returning to it, like a moth finding the same lamp. Somewhere out there was the reason Margaret Leighton had telephoned Saul Panzer at 7:45 yesterday morning. Somewhere in that envelope might be the reason she was found dead today. And Wolfe, for all his talk of not taking the case, was already drawing the boundaries of the board. Saul hadn't moved far from the front door after Kramer's exit. He stood with his hands in his overcoat pockets, chin tucked slightly down, as if weighing how much longer to linger before making his escape. The raincoat still carried the faint sheen of wet from his earlier walk, and the brim of his hat was beaded with it. You're still here, I said. I thought I might be needed, he replied. His eyes went past me toward the desk, where the manila envelope rested, undisturbed since he'd set it there. Wolfe hasn't opened it, I told him. Not yet, Saul said. And maybe he shouldn't. I took a slow breath, crossed to him, and kept my voice pitched low enough not to carry to the yellow chair. You told Kramer nothing. Fine. But you also said she didn't seem like the type to take her own life. If you're right, there's more than sentiment in there. Her instructions were clear, Saul said. She called to cancel. She called to cancel an appointment, I corrected, not to cancel being alive the next day. You've already bent the rules keeping the envelope this long. Why stop bending when the one man who might use it is sitting 10 feet away? Saul's jaw flexed once. He glanced at Wolfe, who appeared occupied with tracing a line of print on the Gazette with the tip of his forefinger. If I hand it over, I'm trusting him to use it right. That, I said, is the one safe bet in this town. He studied me for a moment, then stepped past. Wolfe's eyes lifted as Saul stopped beside the desk. I've decided, Saul said. If you want to open it, go ahead. Wolfe set aside the Gazette. You've revoked your prior instructions? I have. Very well. Wolfe extended a hand. I passed him the envelope. His fingers explored the edges, noting the glue seam and the neat fold. With the same care he might give to an orchid blossom, he slit it open with his gold-handled letter knife. 2 items slid onto the blotter, a single sheet of typewriting and a small object wrapped in wax paper. Wolfe moved the paper first, squaring its edges. Archie Goodwin has read his share of typed notes, and this one didn't waste words. Wolfe read aloud in a slow, even tone. If I am found dead, it will not be by my hand. The man known as M, frequenter of the club on West 38th, has used knowledge of an incident in my past to extract money and concessions. I possess proof sufficient to destroy his position and influence. I believe he will kill to prevent its use. Should this message reach you, Mr. Wolfe, you will know I have been prevented from delivering the proof in person. He stopped, eyes lingering on the signature, a bold Margaret Leighton. I let out a slow whistle. She wasn't subtle. Subtlety is wasted when one expects to die, Wolfe said. He tapped the second object. Archie. I peeled the wax paper open. Nestled inside was a small brass key, unadorned, the bow smooth from use. Locker key? I suggested. Possibly, Wolfe said. He leaned back. Saul, what do you know of this club? Never been in, Saul said. But I've passed it. Not the sort of place you walk into without being noticed. Private? More than that, Saul replied. Invitation only. Late hours. Mostly theatrical people and men with money to waste. Wolfe touched the key with his forefinger. Then the receptacle it fits is of interest. Does this match anything you've seen at that location? Saul shook his head. Not from the street. I folded the note along its original crease. So, M, blackmail and a key. That's enough to put Kramer in here with a writ. Yes, Wolfe said, and enough to ruin any chance of extracting further value from the information. We will, of course, inform him. But first... He rose from the yellow chair, crossed to the safe, and withdrew a thin folder of blank stationery. He laid Margaret Leighton's letter on top of a sheet and began to copy it in longhand with his fountain pen. His script was neat, angular, without flourish. You're keeping a copy, I said. Obviously, Wolfe replied. The original will go to Inspector Kramer. My version will remain here for reference. Saul watched, hands still deep in his pockets. If you hand it over, he'll want the key too. Yes, Wolfe said, and he may have it. The key itself means nothing without knowing where to use it, and that knowledge will require more than a police inquiry. I saw the angle. We give Kramer the letter, he investigates M, and while he's grinding through the formalities, we find the lock ourselves. Wolfe's mouth curved slightly. You are learning, Archie. He finished the copy, blotted it, and placed the duplicate in the safe. The original went into a manila envelope, along with the brass key, both sealed with a precise strip of gummed paper. You'll deliver this to Kramer, he said to me, today. Before lunch? I asked. Yes, Wolfe said, settling back into the yellow chair. Before lunch. I prefer to dine unencumbered by the thought of a dead woman's plea unresolved. Saul shifted toward the door. If you need me. We will, Wolfe said. Stay reachable. Saul nodded once and left. I stood by the desk, looking at the now empty spot where the envelope had rested since morning. Any thoughts on who M might be? I asked. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. Several, all useless without corroboration. Begin by compiling a list of establishments on West 38th Street in 1949, licensed to serve liquor after midnight. That'll take time. Indeed, Wolfe said, reaching for his beer. And time, Archie, is the one resource we control entirely, until someone takes it from us. West 38th had the look of a street that preferred the night. Narrow storefronts with drawn shades, neon signs unlit until the hour made them worth the current, and a scattering of doorways recessed far enough to make a man wonder who might be standing in them. The club's entrance was one of those, black lacquer, brass trim dulled to a warm brown, and a doorman in a dark suit who looked as if he could recite the first names of every regular for the last decade. I gave him mine, pitched with just enough familiarity to suggest I belonged, and was waved inside. The first thing was the light, low amber from shaded sconces pooling in places and leaving others to shadow. The second was the smell, gin, cigarettes, and the faint mineral tang of old ice from the bar. The room was arranged in 2 tiers, tables and booths below, a narrow balcony above with a short railing and a scattering of high-backed chairs. On the far wall a trio played something slow and smoky, the saxophone riding over the brushed snare. A man behind the bar caught my eye. Mid-40s, trim, hair slicked back from a widow's peak, and a smile that never quite reached the eyes. I pegged him for Vincent Caro before we exchanged a word. I took a stool near the centre. He stepped over, drying a glass with a folded cloth. What'll it be? Information, I said. And a rye. The rye came first. He set it down, leaned on the bar, and kept his voice low. What kind of information? A woman named Margaret Leighton. Know her? He shook his head once, the motion small but definite. Doesn't ring. She might have come in with a guest, I said. Tall man, grey at the temples, houndstooth suit. Caro's smile thinned. We don't keep records of who comes through, mister. That's part of the appeal. Appeal's fine, I said. Murder's not. For just a flicker, his eyes shifted toward the back hallway. Then they were back on me, steady again. I don't know your lady. Drink up. I sipped, watching him walk away. The hallway he'd glanced at was half hidden behind a carved screen, the kind you could mistake for decoration if you weren't looking. A girl in a short sequined dress drifted past with a tray of cigarettes. She was 20 if a day, with dark hair pinned up and a smile designed to sell another pack. I stopped her with a question. Ever see a woman in here? Red hair to the shoulders, maybe with that tall man. She tilted her head, thought a moment. I think so. A week ago, maybe 2. She was with him for a while. He smoked a pipe, had that suit you mentioned, black and white checks. They sat near the back. The back hallway? I asked. She nodded. By the lockers. That earned my attention. What lockers? For the members, she said. Coats, cigars, bottles. You need a key. Small brass one. Her smile turned curious. That'd do it. I let her go before Caro noticed. The band shifted into something brighter, masking my move from the bar stool to the carved screen. Beyond it, the hallway was narrow, lit by a single bulb in a wire cage. On the left, a run of waist-high lockers in 2 neat rows, each with a tarnished brass number plate and a keyhole the right size for what I had in my pocket. I crouched at number 12, drawing the key from the envelope in my inner coat pocket. It slid in smoothly. Before I could turn it, a voice said, "I wouldn't." Caro stood at the mouth of the hall, hands clasped in front of him, eyes colder than the rye in my glass. "Members only," he said. "I'm thinking of applying," I told him. "You wouldn't pass the interview," he replied. "Come on back to the bar." I straightened, let the key rest in my palm. Seems a man could forget a rule or two if the right reason came along. "This isn't that man," he said. "And there's no reason." We looked at each other for a few seconds. Then I put the key away, brushed my lapel flat, and stepped past him. His shoulders stayed square until I was back in the main room. I finished the rye at the bar, left cash under the glass, and walked out into the damp night. The doorman gave me a look halfway between curiosity and warning, but said nothing. On the sidewalk, the air felt cleaner. The key was still in my pocket, but so was the fact that Vincent Caro had lied. He'd known exactly who Margaret Leighton was, and he didn't want me near locker 12 to prove it. The street was darker after midnight, with the lamps wearing halos from a fine mist. I walked alone, coat collar up, the brass key resting cold in my pocket. West 38th kept its secrets tucked under its eaves, and the club liked that arrangement. The doorman from earlier had gone inside. A different man guarded the door now, younger by a decade and wider by a yard. His eyes tracked my approach without any effort to hide the appraisal. "Closed," he said. "For the public," I replied. "I came to collect a hat." The line was tired, but so was he. He swung the door with a grunt and left me to the hush of the entry. The lobby smelled of old smoke and polish. Beyond it, the main room lay dim, with chairs turned up on tables. A bartender wiped down the far end and pretended not to see me. I didn't force the social niceties. I took the route I wanted, straight to the carved screen, and slid behind it like I'd been born to that corner. The hallway was close and poorly lit. The bare bulb threw a thin cone on metal. The locker bank waited, numbers stamped, keyholes lined in brass. Number 12 sat where I had left it, 3 from the end on the lower row. I crouched and took the key from my pocket. It went in as if it owned the slot. I turned it, slow, feeling the smooth fall of the tumblers. The door swung outward. An empty space looked back at me, a hollow that carried the smell of old cigarettes and stale cologne. The interior paint was scuffed. Along the bottom rail, a scrap of newsprint clung in the seam. The strip held half a date. "Org, 1948, it said. I lifted it with 2 fingers and let it sit on my palm. A pocket torch would have helped, but I wasn't going to invite questions with a bright beam. The scrap was torn ragged at one end, clean at the other. I checked the corners and the door, then ran a fingertip behind the back plate, feeling for an envelope or a ridge. Nothing. Whoever had cleared the locker had done the job with care. A soft shoe scuffed the floor behind me. I put the strip in my wallet and stood. "You again," Vincent Caro said. He held his hands easy at his sides. His face had the same careful stillness as before, but his eyes had shifted from lake to ice. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Thought the air here might do me good." "The air here is for members," he said, "and neither of us doubts you are not one." "It's a small city," I said. "We all borrow a little." "Not from me," he replied. "Close that and hand me the key." I kept my posture friendly and my tone quieter still. "I'm not finished with it." "You were never started," he said. "Key." I closed the locker door and felt the click as it met the frame. My hand stayed near my pocket, ready to drop the key inside. Caro lifted a palm. "Don't make me insist," he said. "I will save you the trouble," I answered. "I have a boss who enjoys tidy arrangements. He hates waste. Handing you this now would be waste." Caro studied me for the length of a slow breath. You talk like a man with backers, he said. I don't see any. They eat at home, I said. A chord sounded from the main room as the bartender moved a chair. The noise was all the warning I needed to return the key to my pocket. Caro's eyes didn't miss it, but he didn't lunge. He chose poise over the theatre. You finished, he said. For tonight, I replied. He came half a step nearer, enough to fog the thin air between us. Do not come back, he said. Not with that key, not with any key. I eased around him, took the long way past the bar, left $1 by a clean ashtray, and found the door. The young doorman watched me leave as if measuring how long it would take to follow. He didn't move. The mist was heavier outside. I walked a block, then 2, turned a corner and crossed to a cab rank. A checker waited, engine rough. The driver leaned over his wheel. I got in and gave the address. Back on 35th, the brownstone's windows were dark on the upper floors and warm on the office level. Fritz would be in the kitchen, filing something to perfection. Wolfe would be in the office, thinking about refusing to think about a dead woman. I paid the driver and headed for the steps. The front door opened to my key and closed with its usual dignified sigh. Fritz was crossing the hall with a tray of glasses and a carafe of water. He inclined his head, and I lifted a hand. We didn't trade speeches after midnight unless the house was on fire. The office smelled of paper and beer, 10 parts work to 1 part comfort. Wolfe sat in his yellow chair, the Gazette on the stand, his eyes on the empty place on the desk where the original envelope had once rested. He turned his head when I came in, took in my coat, and said nothing. Locker 12, I said. The key turned. And? It was bare as a banker's conscience, I said. Except for this. I set the torn scrap on his blotter. He bent to it without touching it. Org, 1948, he read. Half a date. Which is half a clue, I said. Unless the other half matters more. Dates do not hang alone, Wolfe said. They tie to events. For a woman who writes that she will not die by her own hand, an old date is a nail holding a picture on the wall. Remove the nail, the picture falls. He let the scrap lie on the blotter, untroubled and ominous. Caro was on my shoulder, I said. He wanted the key. He did not get it. Did he see you remove the scrap? No, I said. I was tighter than his grin. Good, Wolfe said. We will keep this one advantage. He closed his eyes and pressed his fingertips together. The room went quiet except for the clock and the soft, far clink from the kitchen. I took a chair opposite and decided not to break the silence too early. Wolfe's mind worked best when you didn't hand it interruptions to chew. Fritz entered with a small tray. On it sat a covered dish, 2 thin slices of walnut cake, and the carafe I had seen. He placed the tray on the side table without looking at the scrap on the desk. Fritz never let the office infect the kitchen, or the reverse. Mr. Goodwin, he said. A telephone message. I looked up. Now? From a man who called earlier, Fritz said. He said his name was Mr. Michael. Wolfe's eyes opened. What did he want? He asked for you, Fritz said. When I said you were not available, he hung up. He would not leave a number. Describe his voice, Wolfe said. Flat, Fritz said. Not New York, not deep, not young. Which narrows it to a few million, I said. Fritz, immune to my efforts, turned to leave. He paused at the doorway. The cake is fresh, he said, but not urgent. Wolfe gave him a small nod. Fritz went out without sound. Mr. Michael, Wolfe said, almost to himself. We may assume he is not named Michael. I had a similar guess, I said. Mr. M of West 38th prefers a shadow. Wolfe looked at the scrap again. Possibly. Or possibly he hides behind the initial because it suits the theatrical milieu. Either way, he is unnerved. You got that from a hang-up? I got that from the timing, Wolfe said. He called before you returned. He knew or feared that we had something that pointed backward. If he had confidence, he would have left a number. He did not. He wished only to test our availability and resolve. I let him have that. He had earned it with fewer facts than most men need to tie a shoe. Saul telephoned too, Wolfe said. He will be here early. News? He said only that Margaret Leighton had company the day before she died, Wolfe said. A man who kept a distance. He did not approach her. He followed. The same day she handed Saul the envelope, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. Which makes the follower a person of interest. He lifted the scrap. This is the hinge, he said. The rest of the door swings from it. What happened in August of 1948 that could anchor a blackmailer's hold on Miss Layton? We must answer that before we trot back to West 38th. We could ask Kramer, I said. We will, Wolfe answered, after we learn enough to make his question finer and his patience longer. He set the scrap down again and looked at me. Tell me about Caro, he said. Not his posture, his fear. He's careful, I said. He wants the key off the board. He is either covering for someone, or he hopes to be that someone given time. He never raised his voice. He never touched me. He let presence do the pushing. And the doorman? A big man with a simple job, I said. He prefers a closed door. He didn't care for my face. I'm sure I'll return the favour. Wolfe did not smile. We will not waste time on doormen, he said. We will spend it on dates and records. I went to my desk and pulled the city directory, then a stack of clippings we kept for times like this. I organised a page for August 1948 and started a list. Society events, crime notes, accidents, fires, scandals, openings, closures. If Margaret Layton was in the society pages, I would find her. If not, I would find the people who were, and then look for the extra face on the edge of the photograph. The telephone rang. I moved to it and picked up. Goodwin, I said. Saul Pantzer's voice came through, steady as usual. I'm a block away. You awake? Regrettably, I said. Come on. I hung up and went to the hall to unlatch the door. I left it secure and waited. The bell sounded a minute later. I opened and let Saul in. Fritz never opens the front door, and tonight was no exception. Saul took off his hat, shook a fine mist from the brim, and joined us in the office. Wolfe inclined his head. You said she was followed, Wolfe prompted. Saul took the straight chair, sitting forward. Yesterday, between 2 and 4, he said. She moved from Midtown to the village and back again. The man stayed half a block off, never pushed. 30s, perhaps 40. Houndstooth suit, tall, grey at the temples, carried himself like he had practice. The same description the cigarette girl gave me, I said. Pipe smoker, Saul added. He lit once with a match cupped tight. He watched the flame more than the light. Did he see you? Wolfe asked. I doubt it, Saul said. He was good, but he never looked back when it mattered. Do you have him now? I lost him at dusk, Saul said. He used a delivery truck for cover and slipped through a hotel lobby. I waited. He did not come out again. Wolfe's upper lip moved a fraction. We are not chasing mystics, he said. He had a door inside. The hotel is a link. Saul nodded. I'll pull the registry in the morning, he said. I can start with the desk clerk and work up. You will, Wolfe said, and we will equip you with questions that make sense. I took the scrap and handed it to Saul. He studied it, turned it once and passed it back. Half a date, he said. Which makes it a provocation, Wolfe said. Someone wanted us to look backward and did not trust us with the whole. Either they were interrupted, or they preferred to ration the bait. Or they cleared the locker in a hurry, I said, left the scrap stuck and called it done. Possible, Wolfe said, but not elegant. He reached for the walnut cake and cut a small piece with the edge of the fork. He ate with the fastidious care of a monk counting beads. We will proceed on 2 lines, he said. Archie, find August 1948 in the papers, with attention to any mention of Margaret Layton or persons of her acquaintance. Gather items on social events she might have attended, accidents, charity functions, controversies. Saul, identify the man with the pipe and the suit. He officiates in this matter. He may be M, or he may be a hand for hire. Saul glanced at me. If he is M, he telephones kitchens late, he said. Fritz told you? I asked. I passed him in the hall, Saul said. He mentioned the call. He is not one to gossip, but this house runs on facts, and he respects that. Mr. Michael, Wolfe repeated. He is either clumsy with aliases or fond of games. Either way, he is cautious. He relieves me of the burden of inviting him here. You plan to bait him instead, I said. Perhaps, Wolfe said. Or perhaps I plan to do nothing at all, which can be an effective lure when a man expects the opposite. Saul rose. I'll be at the hotel at opening. I'll call from the corner drugstore when I have a name. Use the pay telephone, Wolfe said, not the desk. Saul tipped his hat and left. I followed him to secure the door and returned. Wolfe was already back with the papers, sliding clippings toward me. Start with obituaries from that month, he said. Then weddings, then philanthropic scandals. If Miss Layton was vulnerable, an association may show. Any preference for which scandal? I asked. I prefer those with money, but I will tolerate those with sentiment if they involve falls from heights, stairs or windows, Wolfe said. Blackmailers favour gravity when mercy fails. I worked the index cards and clipped items with tidy margins. I logged each under date, section and any name with a capital letter. The stack grew, small at first, then steady. Wolfe's breathing deepened, which would have meant sleep in most men, but in Wolfe it meant thought. He sipped water, then beer, then neither. The office clock ticked its way toward 2. I pushed a final clipping across the desk. Charity gala at the Kavanaugh in late August, I said. Guest list includes a handful of names with money and teeth. No mention of Margaret Leighton. There is a photograph of the ballroom with 4 faces laughably clear and everyone else turned away. Read the caption, Wolfe said. I did. Sponsors include Harold Enright, I said. Widower, Steele. Wolfe opened one eye. Note him, he said. He may matter later. We left it at that. The strip lay on the blotter, a modest scrap with a grin I didn't trust. We had a key that opened a box that held air, and a date that cut itself short to keep the rest of the month guessing. The man with the pipe had a habit of being where Margaret walked and then being where I could not follow. At 2:30, Wolfe stood, which for most men would mean stretching. For him, it meant only that the floor had changed its agreement with his weight. He put the clippings into a folder, placed the scrap in a waxed envelope, sealed it, and marked it with one word in neat script. Locker. We will speak to Inspector Kramer before noon, he said. We will give him the letter's copy and the fact of the key. We will not give him the scrap until we know what it attaches to. Kramer will growl, I said. He will, Wolfe said. He may also work. I have no objection to either. I walked him to the hall, watched him mount the stairs at a pace that accepted the existence of gravity without negotiating with it. The house settled. I turned off the office lamps, left one by the bookcase, and checked the bolt on the front door. When I finally put my head on a pillow, the date still sat behind my eyes. August 1948. I turned it over in thought like a coin I couldn't yet spend. Somewhere in that month a hinge had been set, and a door swung on it toward a woman who knew exactly how she would not die. The man who called himself Mr. Michael liked kitchens and hang-ups, which put him in the habit of covering his mouth when it mattered. I slept a little. Morning comes, even when you don't invite it. The first call after 9 was Saul. I picked up before the second ring. Name? I asked. Not yet, he said. But our man checked into the Hotel Farnham yesterday, under a different initial each time he signed the day ledger. I have 3 variations, all with the same hand. M's among them? Yes, Saul said, twice. Hold the desk clerk, I said. We'll press him later. I hung up and looked at Wolfe, who had just come from the plant rooms, the scent of orchids clinging to his sleeves. He lowered into the yellow chair and lifted his eyebrows. Progress? He asked. Enough to keep breakfast interesting, I said. Wolfe scowled at the word interesting, but he took the folder anyway. He read in silence, then set it beside the blotter. Good, he said. The scrap leads. The key confirms. Mr. Michael calls in fear, and a man with a pipe makes notes in hotel ink. We have a frame. We will now need the portrait. And the painter, I said. Wolfe's mouth drew at one corner. Yes, he said. The painter too. The strip of newsprint sat in the centre of Wolfe's blotter like a splinter that had worked itself deep. He'd given me the afternoon to make it earn its keep. That meant the Gazette's archives, the Times, the Post, and a trip to the public library's clipping morgue, where the smell of paste and brittle paper could make a man forget his own name. By 4:30 I had the August 1948 files in order, and one item circled in red pencil. I carried it back to the brownstone, where Fritz's preparations for dinner made the air thick with the scent of shallots and stock. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes shut, fingertips together. I put the folded clipping on the stand next to his beer. He opened one eye. You have found the nail. Charity Gala at the Kavanaugh Hotel, August 27th, I said. The Kavanaugh Aid Society, benefit for veterans housing. I'll read you the roll call. I unfolded the clipping, let my tone take the smooth, deliberate pace Wolfe liked when a fact mattered. Among the sponsors, Harold Enright, steel magnate, recent widower at the time, wife deceased August 4th cause, accidental fall down the staircase of their estate in White Plains, no inquest requested by the family. 3 weeks later, Enright arrives at the gala with Margaret Leighton on his arm. Wolfe's other eye opened. Photograph? Yes, I said. Page 3, grainy, but good enough. Enright in black tie, white carnation, Margaret wearing a silver gown with a shoulder clasp, left hand on his arm, head tilted toward him. Comfortable, Wolfe murmured. Very, I said. Caption makes no bones about her being his charming companion. He drew the clipping toward him. You say recent widower, as if it were not merely chronological. I say it because the dates do the talking, I told him. 3 weeks from accidental death to gala escort is brisk, even for the socially resilient. Wolfe made a sound low in his throat. How did she meet him? Not in the column, I said. But Enright's late wife sat on the board of the Kavanaugh Aid Society. Margaret's name never appears in their material before that night. He tapped the clipping. Archie, telephone Inspector Kramer. I did, using the direct line. Kramer answered on the second ring, his voice edged with the kind of patience that doesn't last long. What now, Goodwin? August 4th, 1948, I said. White Plains, death of Mrs. Harold Enright, stairs, accidental. A pause, then, you've been digging where it's cold. It's warmer now, I said. She was replaced as arm candy in 23 days by Margaret Leighton. Another pause, shorter. I remember it, Kramer said. The Mamaroneck boys brought us in for a consult. No forced entry, no signs of a fight. Husband said she'd been feeling faint. He was in the library when he heard her fall. Doctor backed him up. You buy it? I didn't say that, Kramer said. We looked at him. We didn't find enough to lay a hand on him. Neighbours called him devoted. Servants said she was clumsy on the stairs. Nothing you could put on paper without making a fool of yourself in court. Anything on Margaret? She wasn't in the picture at the time, Kramer said. At least, not that we could prove. If you're telling me she showed up on his arm 3 weeks later, I am, he grunted. That's a kind of proof. Not for a jury, but for me. Wolfe lifted a hand. I relayed. Inspector, Wolfe said into the receiver when I passed it to him. If the woman in question possessed knowledge detrimental to Mr. Enright, knowledge of his late wife's accident that would constitute motive for blackmail. That's a reach, Kramer said. It is a reach that lands neatly, Wolfe replied. We have a letter from Miss Leighton stating she was being blackmailed by a man she designated as M. A date linked to August 1948 was in her possession. She was seen with Enright at a time that would make gossip easy and speculation inevitable. If you're right, Kramer said, and if she pushed him for money, that could be why she's dead. Or, Wolfe said, if someone else feared she might speak, they could have silenced her on his behalf or their own. Kramer's tone cooled. You're getting ahead of the evidence. I am arranging it, Wolfe said. Evidence that does not fit is useless. I will call you when it does. He handed the phone back to me. Kramer had nothing else to add, so I closed the line. Wolfe looked at the clipping again. The sequence is too neat to ignore. Wife dies in what is deemed an accident. 3 weeks later, the widower is in public with a woman of no prior society connection. That woman later fears for her life and leaves a date tied to the event. It could still be money, I said. Money is always part of it, Wolfe replied, but not all. To induce fear in a man like Enright, the threat must involve more than the outlay of funds. He could pay without damage to his position. Public scandal, moral implication in his wife's death. That would be intolerable. I leaned back. If she had that, it makes sense she'd keep it somewhere she thought safe, like a locker at a club. And someone removed it, Wolfe said. Perhaps Mr. Enright himself. Perhaps an intermediary. The man with the pipe, perhaps, the follower Saul observed. I poured myself a glass of water from the side table. You think Enright knew she was being blackmailed? If he was the subject, yes, Wolfe said. If she was using her knowledge to extract concessions, he may have been paying her directly. But her letter names a man M. The identity of M remains the critical omission. And Mr. Michael calling kitchens after dark, I said. Possibly, Wolfe murmured. But not certainly. Theatrical clubs and private bars attract a surfeit of men whose surnames begin with M. I glanced at the clock. We could ask Enright. We could, Wolfe said, but we will not, yet. Approaching him without the missing piece would prompt him to close his hand entirely. We will let him believe we are elsewhere. The front bell rang. Fritz's steps crossed the hall. He reappeared in the doorway a moment later. "Mr. Pantzer," he announced. Saul entered, hat in hand. "I've been by the Farnham," he said. "Our man with the pipe checked out this morning. No forwarding. Paid cash. Clark says he carried a slim leather case, dark brown. Could have held papers." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "A case removed from the Farnham on the day after Miss Layton's death," he said, "and the locker is emptied." "It fits," Saul said. "You think it's Enright's man?" "Possibly," Wolfe said. "Or another interested party. Did the clerk recall any name?" "Marshall," Saul said. "First initial M. No address given." "That," Wolfe said, "is convenient." Saul set his hat on his knee. "You have something?" "We have a date, a gala, a companion, and a death before both," Wolfe said. "Mr. Enright is central. The question is whether he is victim, culprit, or both." I said, "Kramer thinks the fool was suspicious." "Then Kramer is capable of thought," Wolfe said. "But suspicion is not proof. We will require more. Statements, accounts, inconsistencies. We will begin with those who attended the gala and who might recall the peculiarities of Enright's debut with Miss Layton." "That's a long guest list," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said, "and the longer, the better. More mouths to contradict one another." He reached for the clipping and held it out to Saul. "Memorize the faces. You will speak to the band leader, the maitre d', any staff still living and accessible. Ask about Enright and his companion, how they arrived, how they behaved, with whom they spoke." Saul nodded once. "I'll start tonight." "Good," Wolfe said. "Archie, prepare a list of trustees and patrons of the Kavanaugh Aid Society from 1948. We will look for those inclined to talk, and those least inclined." When Saul had gone, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. Blackmail involving only money is a transaction. Blackmail involving murder is war. The dead woman was fighting one. "And she lost," I said. Wolfe's voice was almost a murmur. "For the moment." The clipping lay between us. Its type faded, but its meaning darker than the print. Harold Enright's smile in the photograph was polite, correct, and entirely untroubled. Margaret Layton's was warmer, but in the curve of her lips there was the faintest tension, as if the camera had caught her between calculation and charm. Somewhere in that August night, between the champagne and the dance floor, between the speeches and the music, a fuse had been lit. It had burned quietly for more than a year, until the smell of gas in a small kitchen told us it had reached its end. Wolfe opened his eyes. "We will speak to Enright," he said, "but on my terms." Which meant his chair, his timing, and his rules, and Enright, whether he knew it yet or not, was going to sit in one of the red chairs and answer questions he would rather not hear asked. The telephone rang at 11:04, a detail I noted only because Wolfe glanced at the clock before lifting the receiver. He was in his yellow chair, orchids done for the morning, lunch an hour away. I was at my desk, finishing a report for the Delafield matter that he'd already read, but wanted retyped without the typographical blemishes. "Mr. Wolfe," said the voice on the line, deep, deliberate, and with the faint husk of a man who'd spent decades in boardrooms and committee halls. "This is Enright." I watched Wolfe's eyes narrow a fraction, just enough to register on a man who could sit in a chair for hours without a muscle stirring. "Mr. Enright," he replied, tone even. "I'll be direct," Enright continued. "I require your professional discretion in recovering certain private correspondence. It may have been in the possession of Margaret Layton before her recent disappearance." Disappearance was one way to put it. Margaret was cold in a mortuary drawer, though Enright either hadn't read the evening papers or was testing Wolfe to see how much he knew. Wolfe did not oblige him with correction. "What sort of correspondence?" Wolfe asked. "That's not a detail I'm prepared to discuss at this moment. I can say it is personal, not business. Its contents are of no consequence to anyone but myself." "And you believe Miss Layton had this correspondence?" "Yes." "How came she by it?" A pause. "Through the unfortunate curiosity of an acquaintance. My acquaintance." "That implies she was not your acquaintance," Wolfe said. "Not directly. I met her twice. Both occasions were socially benign." "Yet you now want material you think she held," Wolfe said. "Why not request it of her?" "She is no longer available to request anything from," Enright said. His voice remained steady, but there was an edge under the words, as if he were grinding them through his teeth. "I will pay you a generous retainer to recover the documents quietly and keep the matter out of the press." Wolfe leaned back, fingertips pressing together. Generous retainers, sir, are pleasant to contemplate, but I do not accept them without sufficient facts. You have my assurance that the documents are of no criminal significance, Enright said. Assurances are not facts, Wolfe replied. Silence held for 3 beats. Then Enright said, My reluctance to elaborate is in your interest as well as mine. The less you know, the easier it will be to conduct your work without entanglements. That is an absurdity, Wolfe said. If I am to act effectively, I must know precisely what I seek, why I seek it, and from whom it must be recovered. To proceed otherwise would be dereliction. I see. The words came clipped now, and I could picture Enright in some panelled office, his hand tightening around the telephone, calculating whether the next sentence would be a threat or a concession. Then we appear to be at an impasse. It seems so, Wolfe said. Good day, sir. He moved to return the receiver, but Enright spoke again. If you change your mind, I will inform you, Wolfe said, and replaced the handset with finality. I swiveled my chair. Well, that was cordial. Wolfe's eyes rested on me, unreadable. You heard? I hear fine, I said. Private correspondence, generous retainer, no facts. He doesn't want you to ask questions, just to pull a rabbit out of a hat and keep the fur off the front page. Wolfe reached for his beer glass, lifted it halfway, and set it down untouched. That alone told me more than any speech he could have made. Wolfe didn't break his own rhythm for anything less than a genuine turn in the wind. You don't believe him, I said. Belief is irrelevant. He has proffered insufficient substance to warrant acceptance. And yet, his gaze sharpened. And yet? You've got that tone, I said, the one that means you've already marked it on the calendar in your head. You refuse the money, but you're interested. He settled back, folding his hands over his waist. Margaret Leighton was not remarkable in the conventional sense, yet she attracted and sustained the attentions of men whose interests are not easily diverted. One of them now calls to recover something she held. That is of interest. Especially when he won't say what it is, I said. Yes, Wolfe agreed. Especially then. The afternoon light through the south window picked up the dust motes over my desk. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, shaking the glass. Inside, Wolfe sat in silence, the clock ticking toward lunch. It was the kind of silence that meant work was coming. You want me to find out where Enright's calling from? I asked. That will be futile, Wolfe said. He will have placed the call through an intermediary. Then what? We will wait, Wolfe said. He will call again, or someone will, on his behalf. Patience, Archie. You are chronically deficient in it. Comes from years of working here, I said. His mouth twitched, not enough to be called a smile, but enough to close the conversation. I turned back to the typewriter, but my mind wasn't on the Delafield report anymore. If Enright was lying about what Margaret had, there was a reason. And if Wolfe was interested, there was a case coming, whether the retainer came with it or not. Somewhere, in a locked drawer or behind a panel, there was a piece of paper worth a phone call from a man like Enright, and worth Wolfe's attention. And in my book, that meant it was also worth mine. It was 10 o'clock when the telephone rang, cutting through the quiet of the brownstone like the blade of a cold wind. I'd been in my room, jacket off, reading the evening edition when the bell called me out. The sound was too deliberate to be a wrong number, too late for anything social. I crossed the office, lifted the receiver, and found Kramer's voice on the line, gruff, worn, and with an edge I recognized. Goodwin, put Wolfe on, now. He's in the plant rooms, I said. I can take a message. This isn't for you, he told me. Caro's dead. Vincent Caro, stabbed in his office at the club. We found something near the body. Wolfe will want to hear it. The last sentence was a hook baited for my employer, but Kramer wasn't in the mood to explain. I went to the hall, mounted the stairs, and eased open the greenhouse door. The heat and damp closed in like a curtain. Wolfe was at the far bench, tweezers in hand, examining a root ball as if its secrets might elude him if he blinked. I told him Kramer was on the line. His brows drew down. Did he say why? Yes, I said. Caro's been murdered. He's got something for you. Wolfe set the tweezers aside, came down, and took the receiver with the air of a man doing someone a favour. The exchange was brief. I heard his tone flatten, then deepen. Indeed, he said. Yes, Inspector, I'm at home. You may come. He replaced the receiver and turned to me. We are to expect him presently. He has found a fragment of newsprint. Like the one from Margaret Leighton's place? He nodded once. The other half of the date. When Kramer arrived, he brought the smell of rain on a police coat and the manner of a man who had already said too much. Fritz showed him in. Wolfe didn't rise. "You know I can't hand this over," Kramer said, fishing in his pocket. "Chain of custody. But you can look." He placed a small glassine envelope on the desk. Inside was a ragged strip of paper, the type blurred at one corner where a drop of something had dried. I leaned over. The numerals matched the first half we'd taken from Margaret's carpet. When Wolfe joined the two pieces, the date was whole, crisp in its finality. Wolfe studied it, then slid both fragments into a fresh envelope, writing on the front in his heavy script, "Evidence, not to leave the house." He set it in the top drawer, turned the key, and looked at Kramer. "This connection is now indisputable," Wolfe said. Kramer's jaw worked. "It doesn't prove who stuck him. We found Caro in his office, chair pushed back, papers on the floor. Knife was on the desk, wiped but not well. My men are still going over it." "And the time of death?" Wolfe asked. "Between 8 and 9, Kramer said. "No one saw anyone go in. Members keep their own counsel. Staff heard nothing." I thought of the hallway behind the carved screen, the lockers with their tarnished brass plates, and the way Caro's eyes had hardened when I'd been near number 12. Wolfe shifted in his yellow chair. "You have a suspect?" Kramer snorted. "Half the membership, but you had a word with him yesterday. Anything to share?" Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, as if denying an impertinent request oxygen. "No, Inspector. We had no arrangement beyond conversation. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." Kramer gave me a look on his way out, a look that said he was tired of being kept at arm's length but knew better than to push Wolfe at night. When the door had closed, Wolfe told me to sit. "Archie, you will write a memorandum of your visit to the club. Be precise. I suspect Mr. Caro's demise was not a solitary event, but the second movement in a composition whose end has not yet been played." I went to my desk, the rain ticking against the window, and began to set it down, every glance, every hesitation, every door I hadn't opened. Wolfe sat with his eyes half shut, the picture of a man listening to music only he could hear, and somewhere in that melody was the sound of a knife striking twice. Under the sodium glow of the street lamps, Saul Panzer leaned against the brickwork opposite the club's side entrance. His collar was up, hat brim low, a cigarette held in fingers that didn't twitch. He had been there since a little after 10, watching the rear door. At 20 past, the bartender emerged, the one with the sandy hair and the habit of scanning both directions before stepping out. Saul eased off the wall, letting the man get half a block ahead before falling in. The rain had begun again, thin and steady, misting the pavements of the Lower East Side. The bartender walked without hurry, hands deep in his coat pockets. He passed 3 shuttered shops and stopped at a narrow front with a frosted glass panel above the door. Caldwell Printing. Saul loitered across the street, watching him knock twice, pause, and knock again. The door opened just wide enough to admit him. Saul crossed, tested the handle, and found it unlocked. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of ink and damp paper. Stacks of card and envelopes rose like miniature skylines. The proprietor, a man in his late 50s with grey at the temples, looked up from a workbench. His eyes moved from Saul's hat to his shoes. "You're not here for a job ticket," he said. "No," Saul replied. "I'm here about photographs. Stage work. For Mr. Caro." The man hesitated, then pushed his glasses higher. "We did some pieces, composite images, staged rooms. He said they were for theatre backdrops." Saul took a slow step nearer. "And the subjects?" The proprietor's fingers fidgeted with a metal ruler. "Ladies, gentlemen, certain faces I recognized from the papers. One of them was a woman named Margaret. We, arranged scenes with her and others. A man named Enright, for example. Caro was particular about those, wanted them to look candid." "Negatives?" Saul asked. "He kept them himself, said they'd be safe in his locker at the club." The man's gaze slid to the door. "But when I saw him last week, he said they were gone." Saul nodded, left him with the hum of the printing press in the back room, and made for West 35th. By the time he reached the brownstone, the rain had soaked the brim of his hat. Wolfe was in the yellow chair, eyes closed, fingertips together. I was at my desk, working on a note for Kramer. Saul reported in, every turn, every word. Wolfe's lids lifted halfway when the name Enright entered the air. "Pfui," he murmured. So, the purpose of Locker 12 was not to hold liquor, as its size suggested, but to imprison a set of negatives, material of value to Mr. Carrow, and peril to others. I said, and between Margaret's death and my visit, they disappeared. That brass key you've been glaring at all week looks a lot more like a motive now. Wolfe's glance moved to the drawer where the key lay. Yes, the sequence is clear. Margaret dies. The negatives vanish. Mr. Carrow follows her to the grave. The key, Mr. Goodwin, is not merely incidental. It is the axis upon which both deaths turn. Saul adjusted his hat brim, the rain still dripping from its edge. Then whoever has those negatives has reason to keep them quiet. Indeed, Wolfe said, and reason enough to kill again if threatened. The orchids upstairs would not be tended until morning. Wolfe had no intention of moving from that chair until he knew precisely whose hands had turned the key, and when. The rain had carried on through the morning, a steady drizzle that glossed the pavements and left the gutters running. I took it as a cue to keep my coat collar high and my hands in my pockets. Wolfe had suggested, in the tone of a man handing off a tedious errand, that I pay a call on Miss Lillian Grant. The name had come from Margaret's old address book, not at the front where friends went, but tucked near the back among the numbers pencilled in with no surnames and no explanations. Wolfe's reason was straightforward. Lillian had been in Margaret's circle, and might know what had been worrying her in those last weeks. Her building was a modest one on East 57th, the sort that had a thin lobby and an elevator with a gate you had to slide yourself. The operator was a lean man in his 60s, who looked as if nothing on earth could move him faster than he wanted to go. "Miss Grant," I said, showing him the card I'd written her name on. He nodded once, worked the gate, and we started the slow climb to the 4th floor. The carpet underfoot was worn thin in the centre, the walls painted in a cream that might once have been brighter. She opened the door at my knock without asking who it was. Early 30s, dark hair, eyes that met you straight on but not warmly. She wore a simple green dress with a belt, and had the poise of someone accustomed to company she didn't quite trust. "Miss Grant? I'm Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe." Her mouth tightened at the name, not in recognition, but in the reflex of someone who heard a professional title and thought of complications. "Come in," she said, and stepped aside. The apartment was neat, scented faintly with violets, and quiet enough that the rain against the windows seemed part of the room. She led me to a sofa and sat opposite in a straight-back chair. "I suppose this is about Margaret," she said. "That's right," I told her. "We're looking into the circumstances of her death. You were close?" A pause. Close enough to know she'd been frightened. She didn't say much, but there was someone she referred to, never by name. She called him the one with the cane. It was the kind of phrase you don't forget. A man she knew well? Not well. He'd been around once or twice, tall, older, carried himself as though the ground was his. The cane wasn't for walking, it was, well, an ornament, I suppose. Ebony with a silver top. She said the sight of him at the end of a corridor would set her teeth on edge. I took out my notebook and gave the description a place of its own. Did she say why? She didn't need to. It was in her face. She told me once that he could turn a room into a courtroom without raising his voice. That was enough to let a possibility slide into place. Did she mention the name Milton Crane? Lillian's brow furrowed. Is that who he is? It fits. Retired judge known to favour a cane of that description, presided over some significant cases. I left it at that for the moment. Did Margaret tell you anything about what connected them? She said he'd been involved in a matter years ago, something to do with a man named Enright. His wife had died. Margaret wouldn't go into details, but she hinted the case hadn't been handled cleanly. That's all. Which was more than nothing. Wolfe would appreciate that the threads were starting to show. When was the last time you saw her? A week before it happened. We had tea here. She was restless, checking the window as if expecting someone. I asked her directly if she was in trouble, and she said, "Not if I can keep him in his chair." I didn't know what she meant. I closed the notebook. "If you think of anything else, I'll telephone," she said, but her eyes told me she doubted she'd need to. Back in the street, the drizzle had thinned to a mist. I walked 2 blocks before hailing a cab, giving the driver the brownstone's address. It was early afternoon by the time I hung my coat in the hall and went through to the office. Wolfe was in the yellow chair, the newspaper folded neatly on the side table. He had a look that said he'd been considering a line of thought for some time and was not yet done with it. "Well?" he asked. I gave him the substance. The cane, the manor, the name Crane, and the link to Enright's late wife's estate. Wolfe listened without interrupting, the lids half lowered over his eyes. "Milton Crane," he said when I'd finished. "Yes, I recall the case. Mrs. Enright died in 1939. The estate was modest, but certain irregularities were remarked upon. The judge allowed them to pass. Such leniency, in a man reputed for severity, invites inquiry." "Margaret thought so," I said. "If she knew enough to make him nervous, it could be our reason for her sudden exit." Wolfe's gaze moved to the corner of the desk where the file lay open. "And the cane? Did she speak of it as a weapon?" "More like a warning flag. She didn't like having him in sight." He breathed out through his nose. "Blackmail is an untidy business. If Mrs. Enright's death was in any degree shielded from proper examination, and Crane's indulgence purchased, the debt could be recalled at any time. That Margaret should have known of it would have been intolerable to him." I leaned a hip on the desk. "So we've got Crane, Enright, Margaret, and the missing negatives from Caro's locker. That's a triangle with an extra corner." "A quadrilateral," Wolfe corrected, "and unstable. I want the times of each participant's movements on the day before Margaret died and on the day itself. I want them charted. You will see Saul at once. Tell him to begin with the judge, his residence, his club, and his calls. We must know when and where he was." "Got it," I said, and picked up the telephone to ring Saul. He answered on the second ring and I laid it out for him. He didn't waste words, just said he'd be in touch by evening. When I hung up, Wolfe was already unfolding a sheet of paper on which he had drawn a rough timetable. Columns for each name, rows for the hours. Some had entries, most were blank. "The truth," he said, "is in the intervals. We will fill them." It wasn't often I saw Wolfe inclined toward action, but the set of his shoulders told me he was already rehearsing the order of questions he would put when the pieces were closer. The cane, the estate, and Margaret's fear were now part of a single line, and Wolfe intended to see where it led. The rest of the afternoon passed in the sort of quiet that makes the ticking of the wall clock sound like a metronome. At 5, Saul called back. He had followed Crane from his club to a law library, and from there to a private dinner in a midtown townhouse. The times fit neatly into Wolfe's chart, leaving 2 conspicuous gaps, one on the afternoon before Margaret's death, and one on the morning of it. Wolfe tapped the empty spaces with the end of a pencil. "There," he said. "One of these is our moment. We will know which before the week ends." I didn't doubt it. I'd seen before how Wolfe could sit like a mountain while the weather moved around him, waiting for the precise instant to make his move. And if Milton Crane thought the cane in his hand was enough to steady him, he had another thing coming. The morning light had the colour of old nickel, flat and without promise. A thin sheen of rain clung to the office windows, distorting the shapes of the brownstones across the street into something half-remembered. I'd been at my desk for 20 minutes, sorting through the stack of notes from the day before, when the first sound of it came, the heavy, measured tread up our front steps. It was a gait I could have identified in my sleep, and it was not one that arrived bearing flowers. I was at the door before the bell could finish. Kramer stood there with his collar turned up, his hat brim stippled with rain. He looked like a man whose temper had been put out to dry and had come back damp. I stepped aside. "You might as well come in before you steam the neighbourhood," I said. He didn't wait for me to close the door before passing. His coat smelled faintly of wool gone wet, the sort of scent that clings even after you think you've brushed it away. He went straight into the office. Wolfe was already in the yellow chair, the Morning Gazette laid open with geometric precision across his knees, a half-finished glass of beer on the side table. "Inspector," Wolfe said, with all the welcome one might give to a census-taker. Kramer didn't bother with the usual throat-clearing. He dropped into the red chair as if it owed him money. "We've got him," he said. "Indeed?" Wolfe didn't look up. "Enright," Kramer continued. "Witness places him near Margaret's building the night she died. We've got him connected to Caro through business records. That's more than enough to bring him in." Wolfe lowered the Gazette by an inch, enough for his eyes to appear above the fold. "Bring him in then, if it will satisfy you." "It'll more than satisfy me," Kramer said, leaning forward. "It'll put a stop to your little game of keeping your cards pressed to your vest while people get killed." Wolfe sighed. It was not theatrical. It was simply the sound of a man whose patience was finite and whose reserves were low. "Inspector, if you arrest Mr. Enright now, you will fail. Your case will not survive the week." Kramer's jaw tightened. "We've got motive. Margaret was blackmailing him." "Yes, but you've made a fundamental error. You think the motive for murder was to silence her. It was not." That made Kramer sit back slightly, suspicion edging in. Then what the hell was it? "To acquire what she had," Wolfe said. His voice was as mild as a winter sun. "The material she used as leverage. It has not vanished into ether. It has been taken. That, Inspector, is your true line of inquiry." For a moment, the only sound was the soft fizz of Wolfe's beer. "You're saying someone else got to her for the same thing," Kramer said slowly. "I am saying," Wolfe replied, "that the person who now possesses that material is not in your custody and will remain so unless you take care." Kramer shook his head. "You could tell me who it is." "I could," Wolfe agreed, "but my conclusions are incomplete, and I will not act on conjecture. You, however, are poised to act without even that." The air in the room seemed to cool a degree. Kramer's hands tightened on his knees. He looked like a man on the verge of deciding whether to walk out or overturn the table. "You know, Wolfe," he said finally, "one of these days your damn patience is going to run out before mine does." "One of these days," Wolfe murmured, and returned his gaze to the Gazette. That was as much as Kramer was going to get, and he knew it. He rose abruptly, muttered something under his breath that I wouldn't repeat in polite company, and left without a farewell. The door had barely clicked shut before Wolfe's eyes lifted to me. "You will go to the Metropolitan Club this afternoon," he said. "Lunch invitation?" I asked. "No. You will find Mr. Brigham in the lounge at 4 o'clock. You will show him the brass key, casually, as if retrieving your wallet, and remark, without emphasis, that it is of no consequence." I sat back. "Bait," I said. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "If the person who now possesses the material believes you have access to it, they may be induced to act. Our adversary is cautious, but opportunity makes even the cautious careless." "And if the hawk swoops?" "You will oblige them by giving them enough rope." The brass key was in the safe upstairs, wrapped in brown paper. It had been Margaret's, and to the untrained eye it looked like it might open any number of uninteresting doors, but Wolfe had traced it to a particular storage locker in a downtown facility, the kind of place where, if you paid the fee in cash and used no name, the management didn't ask what you kept inside. The locker had been emptied before we got there. "Anything else for the role?" I asked. "A bright ribbon tied to my lapel?" "Phooey," Wolfe said. "Do not make yourself ridiculous. Appear busy. Move often enough to be noticed, not so much that you seem restless, and you will dine there before returning." By 3:30 I was in a cab, heading uptown, the rain having thinned to a mist that hung in the air like pipe smoke. The Metropolitan Club's facade loomed out of the grey, its red awnings vivid against the stone. Inside, the hush was padded, the air warm and touched with the faint scent of leather and brandy. Brigham was already in the lounge, sunk into a wing-back chair with a folded Times, and the look of a man who had never once in his life been late. I gave him the nod Wolfe had prescribed, sat opposite, and after a few sentences about nothing in particular, reached for my wallet. The key came out with it, catching the light briefly before I slid it back into my breast pocket. He glanced at it, no flicker betraying interest, and the conversation drifted to the club's lackluster luncheon menu. But I wasn't there for his reaction. I was there for the shadow it might cast elsewhere. I made sure to be seen. I ordered coffee in the main dining room, thumbed through a newspaper in the hallway, took a seat near the windows where anyone entering could have a clear line of sight. My overcoat was draped loosely over the chair, the outline of the key visible when I leaned forward. It was in the third hour that I noticed him, a man I'd seen before at Margaret's building, leaning against the doorway the afternoon Kramer and I had visited. He was in a brown suit now, reading a magazine he clearly wasn't absorbing. His eyes moved more often than the pages. I let the minutes stretch, then rose, buttoned my coat, and made for the street. The reflection in the glass doors told me he had followed. Outside, the rain had picked up again, fine as breath on glass, and I walked without hurry toward Fifth Avenue. I didn't look back until the second block. He was still there, keeping the sort of distance you'd measure in a tailor's shop. Wolfe had been right. Given the scent of the bait, the hawk had left his perch. Under the tall ceiling of the Metropolitan Club's lounge, the air carried the polite hush of late afternoon. Crystal light from a chandelier refracted in small pools across polished tables, and the murmured talk of members over coffee and brandy drifted in measured currents. I had a seat at a window table, one elbow resting on the arm of a leather chair that had been softened by a few decades' worth of elbows like mine. My job was simple, but like most of Wolfe's instructions, it came with the condition that nothing about it should look like a job at all. I leaned toward Brigham, who had the sort of ruddy face that could make a man look convivial even when delivering bad news. He was here because Wolfe wanted someone to hear me say it, someone whose ears were likely to be connected, however indirectly, to the right gossip channels. "You wouldn't believe what he said," I told him, lowering my voice just enough to force a lean. "Duplicates, safe in the house, won't say where. And you know Wolfe, he doesn't bluff, he has them." Brigham's brows lifted a fraction. "You're certain?" I let my expression answer for me, a mild, confident nod, followed by the distracted sip of a drink. We kept it to that. No embroidery, no repetition. A bait line works best when it drifts. By 6, I was back on the street, coat collar turned up against a wind that had stiffened since morning. The ride to the brownstone was uneventful, the streets shiny from a brief shower. Wolfe was in the plant rooms when I came in, so I reported to the yellow chair's general vicinity without expecting acknowledgement. Dinner came and went. By 10, the house was quiet, the sort of quiet that presses against your ears. Fritz had retired, and Wolfe was deep in a book. I took my regular post in the office, reading, but not so much that I couldn't register a sound. It came just past 11 in the form of a faint metallic scrape from the lower rear of the house. Not the front door, the delivery entrance in the basement. No one came that way without notice, unless they wanted no notice. I rose, closing my book silently, and Wolfe looked up, one finger marking his place. "Yes," he said. I nodded once and went out. The back stair was dim, the banister smooth under my hand. In the narrow corridor by the delivery door, a tall figure had paused, crouched over the lock. The beam of a pocket torch caught the brass for a second before a hand closed over his wrist. Saul Panzer, in a dark overcoat and felt hat, was as quiet in motion as he was in speech. The intruder froze under his grip. The torch clattered once against the wall. "Judge Milton Crane," Saul said, low, almost conversational. The name made the air heavier. Crane straightened slowly, the sharp lines of his face shadowed in the low light. "You've made a mistake," he began, but Saul had already relieved him of a narrow-handled screwdriver and the torch. "No," Saul said, "we haven't." I opened the door at the top of the stairs. "Wolfe wants to see you," I said. In the office, the lamplight was warm against Wolfe's expression, which had acquired that stillness he reserved for moments when the other man's comfort was not his concern. Crane was shown to one of the red chairs. He sat, folding his hands as if arranging them for a photograph. "You will explain," Wolfe said. Crane's eyes moved to me, then Saul, then back to Wolfe. "I was making inquiries, ill-advised perhaps, about a matter in which I am implicated unfairly." "You were attempting burglary," Wolfe corrected. "And not at random. You sought an item you believed to be on these premises. You failed to find it because you were interrupted. A lapse in judgment, Judge, that may yet spare you greater trouble." "You can't prove intent," Crane said. "Phooey, I need not. I will, however, learn why a jurist of your standing risks his robe for a handful of photographs. Duplicates, in fact. That they exist is now common knowledge. You must decide how many more ears should hear your name in connection with them." The silence stretched. Crane's fingers shifted once on the arm of his chair. "You have no idea." "I have considerable idea," Wolfe cut in. "But my interest is in precision. You may speak now or later, under less favourable conditions." From my post near the globe stand, I could see the calculation in Crane's gaze. He wasn't ready to yield. That was fine. Wolfe hadn't expected him to, not immediately. But the bait had been taken, the hawk had stooped, and in the brownstone's quiet heart, the trap had begun to close. Under the yellow lamplight of the office, Wolfe sat with his fingertips pressed together, his eyes fixed on Milton Crane as if the man were a puzzle to be solved without touching the pieces. Crane, stiff-backed in one of the red chairs, had the taut look of a man who understood he was cornered, but meant to manage his dignity while he could. The air between them was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the wall clock and the muffled hiss of traffic on West 35th Street. "I will tell you precisely what you already know," Crane said, his voice carefully modulated. "Yes, I was here last night. I attempted to enter without announcement. Yes, I sought the photographs. And no, I did not kill anyone. The deaths, both of them, are not mine to account for." Wolfe's gaze did not flicker. "Your candour, sir, is overdue. Why the photographs?" Crane's jaw set. "To destroy the M before they could be used against me. They depict me in circumstances, compromising enough to end a career. Enright had them. He meant to see I did not receive the judicial appointment under review by the Governor's Council." "You feared exposure." Wolfe's voice was low, flat, as if weighing each word on a scale. "Yes, but fear does not make me a killer. I will swear to you, under oath or otherwise, I had no hand in Enright's death or in the girl's. I wanted only to see those images gone." I leaned against the globe stand, watching Wolfe read Crane's posture as much as his statement. Wolfe could smell falsehood as keenly as truffles. I'd seen him shred better liars than this one. Yet there was a steadiness in Crane's tone that made me think Wolfe was filing him in the possible truth column. "Your admission," Wolfe said at last, "does not trouble me as much as your restraint. You entered last night without success, which means you were willing to risk burglary to accomplish your end. But your objective was destruction, not possession. That," he shifted slightly in the yellow chair, "implies that the photographs themselves are the peril, not what you might gain by holding them. Therefore, Enright's murder was not to silence him for withholding them from you, but to remove him from another's path entirely." Crane's eyes narrowed. "If you believe that, you're already looking past me." "Indeed." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, as if to shut out the sight of an unnecessary witness. "You will remain available to Inspector Kramer. You will not leave the city. Archie," his lids lifted again, "see him out." I did. Crane's overcoat was folded over his arm, and he left with the bearing of a man who intended to walk straight into a storm without ducking. When the door closed behind him, I returned to the office. Wolfe was staring into the fire, his lips compressed. "You believe him," I said. "Yes, he is ambitious, vain, and careless, but he is not a murderer. That leaves us with fewer options and no photographs." "Phooey." Wolfe's hand twitched toward the bell cord, then withdrew. "The photographs are not gone. They were printed from negatives. The negatives are the key, and the man who claims to have destroyed them is a liar." "Breslow," I said. The name of the print shop owner tasted of stale ink. "Yes, he is a man of limited guile, but he has not told the truth about their fate. You will return to his establishment. Do not announce your purpose. Observe his behaviour, his hands, his eyes. A lie, Archie, is never complete. It leaves a seam." I took my notebook from the desk and slipped it into my coat. "And if the negatives are still there?" "You will secure them, of course. But do not be a fool. If another hand holds them now, it will be the same hand that removed Enright." The fire popped softly in the grate. Wolfe turned his attention to it, dismissing me in the same motion. Outside, the city was a sheet of wet asphalt and shifting shadows. I headed downtown, the tyres on the Packard hissing over the glistening pavement, knowing that somewhere in the narrow-lit streets there was a man who had killed twice, and was keeping his hands clean by letting others search for the evidence he had already claimed. The rain had thinned to a fine mist by the time Saul and I reached Breslow's print shop on Varick Street. The yellowed sign above the door leaned slightly to the left, and the display window showed a pair of dusty enlargers and a row of curling sample portraits. Inside, the air was warm and stale, with the faint chemical tang of fixer clinging to the walls. Breslow was behind the counter, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his eyes flicking between us and the tray of prints he was shuffling. "You've been here before," he said, voice flat. "That's right," I replied, "and this time you're going to be more generous with the truth." Saul closed the door behind us, turning the lock with a soft click. Breslow's hands stilled over the tray. "What's this?" "A conversation without interruptions," Saul said mildly, stepping closer. I leaned on the counter. "We know Caro was running more than a portrait business. He had negatives, pictures of Enright, Crane, maybe others. You told us they were destroyed. They weren't. Breslow swallowed, his throat moving slow. You think I kept them? I think, I said, you're going to tell us what really happened before I start wondering how you managed to keep this shop without customers. His gaze slid to Saul, who was inspecting a shelf of photo paper as if it might hold the answer. All right, Breslow said, voice low. Caro was blackmailing them. Enright over some gambling debts and a woman. Crane over photographs. Private photographs. I printed the set myself. 2 weeks ago, Caro came in with the negatives, told me to lock them up. A week later, they were gone. Gone? I asked. Stolen. I keep my safe in the back. No sign of a break-in, but the lock was picked clean. Caro thought it was Enright or Crane. Then the girl, Margaret, was killed, and I figured whoever took them wasn't finished. Saul's voice was quiet. Why wait until now to tell us? Breslow spread his hands. You don't live long in this business by advertising you've lost a client's leverage. Caro would have ruined me if he thought I was careless. We left him staring at the counter, the chemical scent following us into the damp street. Saul headed east, muttering about the lock. I made straight for the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office when I came in, a book in one hand, a bottle of beer within reach. The yellow chair looked more like a throne than usual. I relayed Breslow's confession. A week before the girl's death, Wolfe murmured, and the safe lock was picked. His eyes narrowed. That places the theft in a narrow window. Who had access? According to Breslow, no one, unless they had a key or knew how to pick a lock. Wolfe closed his book and set it aside. Archie, review for me the connection between Caro and the club where Margaret worked. Caro kept a locker there. Used it to store envelopes, papers, maybe photographs before they went to Breslow. Margaret was the cigarette girl, closed the place most nights. His lips compressed. A locker key is not a precious object to a man careless enough to keep it on a ring in his coat pocket. A woman acquainted with his habits could gain entry after hours. If she had already discovered his blackmail scheme, she could help herself to the goods, I finished, and cut Caro out. And when Margaret discovered the full measure of the leverage in her possession, Wolfe said, she would have known the risk. Caro dead to secure her control. The girl herself killed only when she overreached. Overreached with Enright? Perhaps, but the sequence is plain. The theft preceded her death. The only person with consistent after-hours access to the lockers was she. That is not an accident. Phooey, it is the spine of the matter. I leaned against the desk. So we're looking at a cigarette girl who graduated to blackmailer and then to murderer. Only someone turned the tables. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, then opened again with that slow, heavy certainty I'd learned to trust. The photographer's game was not in the printing, Archie. It was in the arrangement of pieces. Caro set the board. Margaret moved a pawn to take the king, but she never saw the rook waiting. The rain began again, faint against the windows. Wolfe reached for his beer. We will tell Kramer, he said, and watch him blunder toward the truth. The front room of the brownstone had never felt more like a stage. The yellow chair claimed Wolfe, massive and immovable, with the light from the desk lamp catching the sheen of his waistcoat. The 3 red chairs were taken, Enright on the left, rigid and frowning, Crane on the right, one hand tapping his knee, Lillian Grant between them, back straight, eyes fixed on Wolfe as though she might catch him blinking. Near the door, Alice Morton, the cigarette girl stripped now of the stage name glamour, leaned against the wall, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Kramer occupied the arm of the sofa, hat on the radiator, his gaze swinging between Wolfe and the others. Fritz brought the beer without a word, setting a bottle within Wolfe's reach before retreating. Wolfe placed his fingertips together. Gentlemen, Miss Grant, Miss Morton, we will, with your indulgence, conclude our business. His voice was as even as if he were reciting a menu. The events begin in August 1948, when a small piece of newsprint changed hands in the back room of the Crown Club. Half of it came to Mr. Enright, the other half to Mr. Crane. Neither man could read the other's portion without the whole. Enright's jaw tightened. Crane's tapping ceased. Both halves were significant, Wolfe continued, because together they recorded a transaction, names, dates, and a sum large enough to invite blackmail. Each man presumed the other's fragment had been destroyed. That presumption was convenient, but it was false. Wolfe's eyes settled on Alice. You, Miss Morton, served drinks at the club. You had access to their coats, their lockers, and, eventually, their trust. In July of last year, you took Enright's half from his inside pocket. 2 months later, you persuaded Mr. Crane to let you hold his fragment while he attended to a call. Thus, you rejoined the halves for the first time in 4 years. Alice's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. The rejoined newsprint, Wolfe said, became the fulcrum of your trade. You showed it to Margaret Carrow, whose ambitions exceeded her foresight. She attempted to use it without your consent, and paid with her life. Carrow himself died when he threatened to expose you to the men named in the clipping. I reached into my jacket and laid the folded sheet on Wolfe's blotter. It was yellowed, the crease deep where the 2 halves had been joined. The ink was still legible. This, Wolfe said, was retrieved from Miss Morton's room 2 days ago. It was the sole surviving copy. Both victims died because they either possessed it or sought to profit from it. Kramer's gaze bored into Alice. That true? She smiled faintly, though her knuckles had gone white. If it is, she said, you'll have to prove it. You mistake the moment, madam, Wolfe replied. Proof is the province of the police. My task was only to set the table. Kramer rose, reached for his hat, and signalled to the men waiting in the hall. Under the steady lamplight of the office, the air held the dry scent of paper and the faint tang of cigar smoke. Wolfe sat in the yellow chair, fingers tented, the faintest crease between his brows. Before him, Alice occupied one of the red chairs, her posture rigid, chin slightly raised. Kramer leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded, his bulk blocking part of her view of the door. I stood near the globe, the envelope in my pocket carrying more weight than paper ever ought to. Wolfe's gaze rested on Alice. You deny, madam, any connection to the deaths of Margaret Carrow and Edward Carrow. Her lips curved, not into a smile but the shape of one. I deny ever laying a hand on either of them. People die. That doesn't make me the executioner. Kramer's voice came low. You had cause, and we've got witnesses that... She cut him off with a quick shake of her head. Witnesses see what they want. Wolfe inclined his head a fraction. Yes, as do I. And I see a woman accustomed to leverage, to hoarding something until its value peaks. He lifted his hand. Mr. Goodwin. I withdrew the stiff manila envelope, its seal broken earlier in Wolfe's presence, and slid out a set of negatives. The glossy strips caught the lamplight in cold, precise flashes. Her eyes, until that moment languid, tightened in focus. What is that? Recovered this morning, Wolfe said, from behind a false wall in Kessler and Braun's print shop. You used the space to conceal the original negatives of a series of photographs and documents, the contents of that newsprint fragment we discussed. You arranged for enlargements only once you held both halves. Kramer straightened, watching her face. He's not bluffing. I saw the wall myself. Her glance flicked from Kramer to me, then back to Wolfe. If you have them, you know they're worth more than anything else in this room. They were, Wolfe agreed, until they came into my possession. Now they are worth only what they yield to the law. They show the names of men prepared to pay or kill to keep them from daylight. Margaret Carrow tried to act without you. Edward Carrow tried to threaten you. Both became liabilities. The silence was long enough for the radiator to click twice. Then she drew a breath, her shoulders lowering. Fine. Yes. The word came flat. I took them both out. Margaret first. She thought she could undercut me, sell a copy to a buyer uptown. She didn't make it to the meeting. Edward was loud. I couldn't have him spooking everyone before the market warmed up. Kramer pushed away from the desk. Market's closed, lady. Her eyes lingered on Wolfe. You could have made a fortune. I have no interest in such coin, Wolfe said. Nor now do you. Kramer signalled to the uniforms outside. The door opened, cold air slipping in as they stepped forward. She rose without protest, the chair legs rasping against the rug. At the threshold, Kramer looked back. You've got a knack, Wolfe, I'll give you that. It is not a knack, Inspector. It is precision. The door closed behind them, and the brownstone was quiet again. Wolfe reached for his beer. The brownstone had a way of settling into its own stillness after the echo of a closing door. Once Alice had been taken away, and Kramer's tread down the steps had faded into the street. The air in Wolfe's office felt like it had been returned to him, ordered, unhurried, entirely his again. He did not speak at once. He leaned back in the yellow chair, closed his eyes for the span of 2 breaths, then reached with unhurried precision for his glass. The amber beer caught the lamplight as he lifted it. "Saul," he said, not opening his eyes, "turned down not a case, but a noose." I was still by the globe, one hand in my pocket. "You could put that in a note and send it to him. He'd probably frame it." Wolfe's lids rose. "He understands without my assistance." Maybe he did. Saul had brought the envelope here, the one with the negatives, and with it all the machinery that followed. Yet the thing had never been, in Wolfe's terms, a case. No retainer, no contract, no formal acceptance, just a sealed bundle and a stipulation to hold it or not, depending on a call that never came. The call, as it turned out, had been forestalled by a murder. 2 murders. Wolfe drank, set the glass down with its soft ring against the coaster, and stretched his legs. His gaze drifted to the orchids on the stand beside his desk. "You never actually took it on," I said. "I did not." "But you solved it entirely." He made a small sound, not assent, not denial. "I resolved the disorder. That is not the same as prosecuting an engagement." "Tell that to Alice." He glanced at me. "She will not trouble me with queries." The steam from the radiator gave a faint hiss. Outside, a cab rattled past on West 35th Street, tyres flattening the patches of slush left from yesterday's snowfall. Fritz was in the kitchen. I could hear the muted clink of metal on enamel, preparing whatever supper Wolfe had already dictated. The familiar rhythms were back in place, but my mind stayed on the slim packet Saul had handed over. I said, "I wonder how many other envelopes he's declined." Wolfe's brows drew together in faint curiosity. "Meaning?" "Meaning he could have brought you other things over the years. Packages, letters, maybe even people. But he didn't. Not because they weren't dangerous, but because they were." The orchids held his attention for a moment longer. Then he reached for the bottle on the stand, topped the glass with the rest of its contents, and replaced the stopper on the coaster with exact alignment. "It is his privilege," Wolfe said at last. "He exercises judgment. I do the same. The distinction is in our thresholds." "And this one passed yours?" His mouth curved faintly. "It arrived without intention to solicit me. It stayed because murder intruded. That is an intolerable trespass in my domain." That was as close as Wolfe ever came to calling something personal. I took the chair opposite him, the one clients usually filled, and leaned back. "You realize," I said, "that from my side of the desk, it looked exactly like a case. You made deductions. You confronted the guilty party. You handed her to Kramer with a bow on top. That's a case in my book." "In your book," he replied, "there is no accounting for the proper order of affairs. In mine, a case is an agreement. We had none. Therefore you get to feel tidy about the whole thing." He eyed me without amusement. "I get to be precise." I let it go. Arguing Wolfe into my definition of anything was like trying to tilt the building. He took another measured sip, then leaned back, gaze returning to the orchids. The lamplight touched the gloss of their petals, pale against the dark leaves, each one angled to his satisfaction. In the quiet, my thoughts went back over the week. The way the envelope had sat on Wolfe's desk like a dare. The way Alice had looked at it, not as an object, but as a weapon she meant to keep hold of. And Saul, walking in at 10 that morning, casual as a man dropping off dry cleaning, with something in his eyes that didn't quite match the grin. Maybe Wolfe was right. Maybe Saul had passed on a noose. Maybe that was the point, to see if Wolfe would spot it before tightening it around his own neck. I asked, "Do you think she was right about one thing?" "Which thing?" "That the negatives could have made you a fortune." His head turned, slow, deliberate. "Fortune is a vulgar inducement, Archie. It implies deficiency." "And you don't have any deficiencies?" He closed his eyes again. "I have many. That is not among them." The radiator hissed. Fritz's steps came down the hall, paused outside the door, then retreated, signalling that supper was ready when Wolfe chose to take it. Wolfe did not move. He reached instead for a fresh bottle, eased the cap with his thumb, and poured. "You haven't answered the other question," I said. "What question?" "How many other envelopes Saul's turned down?" The faintest smile touched his mouth. I prefer not to know. Why? Because, he said, lifting the glass, speculation is a cheap substitute for certainty, and I dislike cheap things. He drank. I leaned back, watching the lamplight shift on the orchids, and thought that maybe he was right. Some things were better left unopened.